You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the Indus plain, long before the cities were uncovered. The air is heavy with summer heat, the horizon faded and slow. A dry wind moves over the riverbank, carrying grains of silt that have rested here for thousands of years. Beneath this quiet layer of dust, an entire city sleeps, its streets, its wells, its drains, all resting in perfect stillness. The place was once called Mohenjo-Daro, though that name came much later. To the people who built it, it may have had another name entirely, one we no longer remember. What we know is that it stood as one of the world's earliest planned cities, not a chaotic sprawl, but a city arranged with precision, as if designed on a patient grid. For centuries, no one knew it was here. The river shifted its course, the people moved on, and the mud-brick walls sank slowly into silence. It wasn't until the early 20th century, when British archaeologists began tracing the Indus River's course, that the buried outlines of Mohenjo-Daro began to whisper again. When the archaeologists brushed the dust away, they found something strange, not the crumbling chaos they expected, but order. Streets ran straight, intersecting at clean right angles. Buildings stood in deliberate rows. There were drainage channels laid beneath the ground, brick by brick, still capable of carrying water even after 4,000 years. It wasn't the remains of a forgotten tribe. It was the skeleton of a city that had been planned. You walk, in imagination, along one of those streets. The bricks beneath your feet are uniform, baked to almost the same size everywhere. Archaeologists later found that they followed a standard ratio, 1 to 2 to 4. It was as if every builder, from one end of the city to the other, had followed a shared instruction, a silent code of proportion. On either side, houses rise in quiet rows. Some are small, perhaps 1 or 2 rooms. Others have upper floors. You can almost sense how they once looked plain exteriors, but carefully arranged interiors. Doorways rarely open directly onto the main streets. Instead, they turn inward, into courtyards where life unfolded in private. There are no grand palaces, no giant statues, no tombs for kings. The power here is in uniformity, not in show. The grid stretches outward, structured and calm. Archaeologists divided the site into 2 parts, the citadel and the lower town. The citadel sits slightly raised, perhaps built on an artificial mound. It held the city's most important public buildings, though even those lacked the pomp of temples or palaces. The lower town is where most of the residents lived, block after block of homes, workshops, and wells, all fitted neatly together like an ancient puzzle. Each block was separated by streets that were remarkably straight. The precision was so consistent that one could almost measure the city's discipline by its geometry. If you followed a street to its end, you would find a drain running along its side, and near it, a row of evenly spaced manholes, the world's earliest urban sanitation system. When you think of early civilizations, you might imagine noise, hammers striking, walls rising, shouts of command. But here, the story is quiet. The builders of Mohenjo-Daro seemed to move in rhythm with calm order. There is a sense of collective understanding that the city wasn't built for one ruler's glory, but for the comfort of its people. Archaeologists still debate how this coordination was achieved. There are no grand inscriptions, no royal decrees carved into stone. The Harappan script, found on small seals and tablets, remains undeciphered. The organization must have existed, perhaps through local councils or inherited planning traditions, but it left behind no record except the results. A perfectly functioning city. Even the bricks themselves seemed to speak of patience. They were made from river clay, shaped in wooden molds, and baked in kilns until they hardened into soft, reddish blocks. Each one, when stacked upon another, carries the weight of a civilization that valued precision over power at first. Archaeologists expected to find temples or monuments. Instead, they found drains, hundreds of them. Drains running beneath the houses, connecting to main sewers along the streets, each covered by carefully fitted slabs. Nearly every home had its own bathing area, with a sloped floor to guide the water outward. Some houses even had private wells. It was a city built not for spectacle, but for living. Close your eyes and listen. Can you hear it? The sound of water trickling through stone channels, the low hum of daily activity, the gentle sweep of sand against brick. It's not a sound of grandeur, but of rhythm. You can almost imagine a resident waking at dawn. The air is cool, the sky a pale gold. They draw water from the well and pour it into a clay basin to wash. Children step into the street, careful to avoid the channel that carries used water away. In the distance, someone is shaping new bricks, tapping gently against the mold. There's a stillness to it all, the kind that comes not from emptiness, but from balance. And yet, beneath that balance lies mystery. Who planned this order? Was there a central authority, or was it the result of long tradition, an inherited way of building that everyone simply understood? Archaeologists found no evidence of kings, armies, or monumental temples. The seals they uncovered show animals, trees, and simple symbols. Perhaps these people saw power not as something to display, but as something to distribute, woven through their streets, their water, their clay. There's a humility in that idea, one that feels strangely modern. A city designed not to impress visitors, but to function quietly, efficiently. For everyone, as you walk farther into this imagined reconstruction, you find the Great Bath, one of the most striking features of Mohenjo-Daro. It's not a temple in the usual sense, but it feels sacred in its simplicity. A rectangular pool, lined with baked bricks, sealed with bitumen to keep it watertight. Steps descend from either side. There are changing rooms nearby, and a well that supplied water. Drains carried it away when it needed to be emptied. The Great Bath is one of the few places that hint at communal ritual, perhaps a place of purification, reflection, or ceremony. Even here, water and cleanliness seem to hold spiritual weight. The surrounding buildings are practical, almost humble, but you begin to sense the philosophy behind them, that cleanliness, balance, and quiet order were values deeply embedded in the Harappan way of life. This was not a civilization obsessed with conquest or monumentality, but with harmony. Centuries later, when archaeologists lifted these bricks from the dust, they were struck not by the city's ruins, but by its logic. Every street, every drain, every platform seemed to belong to a larger pattern, a pattern of cooperation, of human minds aligned toward collective comfort. Yet there's something melancholy about that order, too. It's so perfect, so complete, that when the city fell silent, it vanished entirely from memory. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, no legends remained, no written histories survived. The people of Mohenjo-Daro left only their patterns, the ghostly geometry of civilization. When the summer rains come to Sind, the water still flows through the channels that were once streets. The ruins glisten, the dust darkens, and for a moment it feels as if the city breathes again. Rainwater gathers in the old drains, trickles along the edges of the excavated wells, and the bricks seem to whisper of their purpose once more. Even today, the city remains partly buried. Excavations continue in small sections, carefully managed to prevent further erosion. The baked bricks crumble easily under modern moisture, so large portions of the site have been left untouched, sleeping beneath their protective layer of sand. Some archaeologists say it's better that way. After all, the city survived 4,000 years, not because it was displayed, but because it was forgotten. When you stand there, in the ruins, there's a stillness that feels timeless. The layout remains visible, a perfect, silent grid etched into the earth. You can trace the lines of streets that once echoed with footsteps, wells that once provided water, and homes that once held laughter. The Harappan builders, in their quiet mastery, had designed something remarkable, a city that could endure silence. But one question lingers. How did such an advanced system emerge, and why did it fade? What kind of society could plan so perfectly and yet leave behind so few traces of its voice? The grid still lies beneath the dust, whispering of forgotten logic. And perhaps, as the night deepens and the world quiets, you might wonder, did they build for eternity or simply for peace? Imagine you are walking again through Mohenjo-Daro, this time not as a visitor from the future, but as someone who lives here 4,000 years ago, when the city still murmured with life. The morning is cool, and a soft mist rises from the Indus River nearby. The streets are damp from an early drizzle. The air smells faintly of baked clay and rain, the perfume of a city built from earth itself. You turn down a narrow lane, and beneath your feet, water moves faintly through hidden channels. Every household contributes to this flow, a trickle from a washing basin, a rinse from a clay jar, the runoff from last night's bath. The drains collect everything, quietly, efficiently. Beneath this city of dust lies another city, one of water. It's hard to imagine that a civilization so ancient could have understood sanitation with such precision. But the evidence is everywhere. Beneath the homes, small drains connect to larger ones. Where the drains meet, inspection holes are built, simple, rectangular gaps that could be cleaned or repaired when needed. If you follow one of these drains to its end, you'll find it empties beyond the city's edge, where waste is absorbed into the soil. It is a small, silent miracle of engineering, one that most modern cities took millennia to rediscover. The people who built this were not following written blueprints or orders from a central ruler. Instead, they were guided by tradition, generations of builders, masons, and planners who learned by doing. Their knowledge wasn't stored in libraries or inscriptions. It was lived knowledge, passed from hand to hand, from one craftsman to another, and their tool, the brick, was their language. The Harappan brick is one of history's simplest and most powerful inventions. Small, rectangular, and proportionate, it became the silent signature of the Indus world. Whether in Harappa, Lothal, Kalibangan, or Mohenjo-Daro, the same ratio, 1 to 2 to 4, repeats endlessly. It is as if every builder carried the same mental rhythm, the same quiet code of design. You can almost see the brickmakers at work. They kneel beside the riverbank, mixing silt and clay. The mixture must be just right, not too wet, not too dry. They press it into wooden molds, tap it gently to release air, then lay it in neat rows under the sun to dry. Later, the bricks are fired in kilns, the heat glowing through the night like distant lanterns when the morning comes. The bricks are ready, a sea of red and ochre rectangles, waiting to become something greater. There's beauty in their simplicity. Each brick is modest on its own, but together they form everything: homes, wells, drains, baths, platforms. They form the rhythm of the city itself. Inside the houses, the same sense of order prevails. The floors are clean, swept daily. In many homes, a small raised platform serves as a bathing area, slightly sloped, with a channel leading to the drain outside. The walls are coated with fine plaster, smooth to the touch. Some homes have staircases leading upward, evidence of a second story, rare for such an ancient time. Each household, whether large or small, seems designed around privacy and cleanliness. The main street may be busy, but the interior courtyard is calm. Life happens inwardly, in quiet corners, among the cool shade of walls, near the soft splash of water. It's here that daily rituals unfold, grinding grain on stone querns, shaping pottery, tending small fires for cooking. You can hear the muffled rhythm of wooden pestles striking grain, the hum of voices exchanging news of the day. And yet, above it all, there is a stillness. There is no shouting of commands, no signs of military rule. There are no temples towering above the city, no palaces dominating the skyline. The people of Mohenjo-Daro seem to have organized their world through mutual understanding, through shared standards, not centralized power. Some archaeologists call this the Harappan paradox, a civilization advanced enough to build cities, yet humble enough to do so without kings or monuments. The most iconic of all Harappan public structures, the Great Bath, reflects this balance between simplicity and sophistication. You can picture it clearly now. A large, rectangular tank, about 12 meters long and nearly 3 meters deep. Its floor and walls are lined with perfectly fitted bricks, sealed with natural bitumen to make them watertight. Steps descend from either side, smooth from centuries of feet. Around the bath are small rooms, perhaps changing chambers or spaces for quiet reflection. There is a well to supply fresh water, and a drain to empty it when cleaning was needed. The Great Bath stands at the heart of the citadel, not as a monument to power, but as a testament to discipline. It suggests ritual, not of worshipping gods through fire and idols, but of cleansing, of order, of renewal. When you think of civilizations, you might imagine temples or kings. But here, the central structure is a bath. It tells us what mattered: purity, maintenance, and flow. Even the surrounding granaries, with their orderly rows of platforms and air ducts, reflect the same logic, the quiet mastery of storing, preserving, and distributing life's essentials. Everything in Mohenjo-Daro seems to follow a code of moderation, of keeping things running rather than ruling over them. Let's step back into the streets again. The soundscape is soft, clay wheels rolling on dust, the the creak of wooden carts, the occasional bark of a dog. There's a faint, rhythmic beat from somewhere, perhaps a potter turning his wheel, perhaps a craftsman striking metal. The city breathes in this calm pattern, hour after hour, in the marketplace. You see weights and measures, small cube-shaped stones carved to exact dimensions. They come in precise units, evidence of a standardized system of trade. No one wrote down the rules, but everyone seems to know them nearby. Seals are being pressed into clay, small pieces marked with animals, trees, and the still undeciphered Harappan script. Each seal is both practical and poetic, an identifier for trade and a symbol of belonging. Some show a bull with curved horns, others a figure seated cross-legged, surrounded by animals, perhaps a deity, perhaps a memory. Through these tiny objects, the quiet economy of the city hums along. Goods move in and out, grains, beads, pottery, copper, tools. Everything flows through unseen order. You pause at a corner where two streets meet at a right angle. The walls here are taller, their bricks darker from rain and time. A small staircase leads upward, perhaps, to a rooftop where residents once dried crops or slept under the stars. From that height, the city reveals its geometry, not random, but pattern. Every street parallel or perpendicular to the next. It's easy to forget that you're standing atop one of the world's earliest examples of urban planning. Long before Rome, before Athens, before the organized avenues of later empires, Mohenjo-Daro had already learned how to balance space and life. The Harappans didn't need to carve their laws into stone. Their laws were written in brick, and yet, for all this brilliance, there is still a sense of quiet modesty. The city doesn't brag. It doesn't reach for the sky like Egypt's pyramids or Babylon's ziggurats. It keeps close to the earth, low, measured, and functional. Perhaps that's why the Harappans lasted for so long. They built not to impress gods or kings, but to survive, to live well, to manage water, to protect themselves from flood and heat. Their buildings were not eternal, but renewable. When walls eroded, they rebuilt. When floods came, they raised the ground level, layer by layer, city upon city. Beneath Mohenjo-Daro lie multiple phases of rebuilding, the work of generations who refuse to abandon balance. At dusk, when the day's heat softens, you can imagine families gathering on the rooftops. The city glows faintly in the golden light. Smoke from cooking fires rises into the air. Someone pours water over the threshold to cool the dust. A child laughs, chasing a clay toy cart down the lane. Somewhere, a mason stacks bricks for the next morning's work. It's peaceful and deeply human, the kind of peace that comes from understanding your place in the rhythm of things. The Harappans lived with the rain and the river, with the cycles of flood and drought. Their architecture didn't fight nature, it worked with it. Even their drainage systems were designed to move with the slope of the land, allowing water to find its way naturally. Theirs was a city that listened to its environment, and in return, it endured. Today, when archaeologists sift through the layers of Mohenjo, they find traces of that endurance, the worn grooves of a doorway threshold, the residue of a hearth, a broken bead from a necklace. Each detail is small, yet together they reveal a civilization not of glory, but of grace, a civilization that built carefully, maintained patiently, and vanished quietly. When you think of it this way, the city feels less like a ruin and more like a pause, a breath in the long story of human order. Still, questions linger like dust in the evening air. Who taught the Harappans to build this way? How did they maintain such uniformity across thousands of miles? And most haunting of all, why did this logic, so complete and calm, eventually fall silent? The drains still lie there, half buried, still capable of carrying water. The bricks still rest in neat lines. The great bath still waits for rain. The city remains, whispering through time, not broken, just paused. And as night deepens over the ruins, you might wonder, what happens to perfection when no one remembers how to keep it flowing? The sky above the Indus is wide and quiet. Clouds roll slowly across the horizon, carrying the scent of faraway rain. In this ancient world, long before the city fell into silence, water was the heartbeat of Mohenjo-Daro. It arrived patiently, sometimes bringing life, and sometimes arriving with a strength that tested every brick and every wall. The Harappan builders did not simply endure the river. They shaped their lives around its unpredictable rhythm. Every year, the monsoon visited the plains of the Indus. The rains began as a whisper, a cool wind curling through the narrow lanes, a soft darkness gathering over the rooftops. Then the showers came, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, tapping on the flat roofs, filling the air with the sound of renewed earth. Water threaded itself through every corner of Mohenjo-Daro, not as a destructive force, but as an honored guest. You step through the city in imagination once more, your feet brushing ancient bricks, still damp from rain. Little streams trickle along the street gutters, those shallow channels that once guided used water away from the homes. They run toward the main drains, hidden but always present beneath your footsteps. If you stood still and listened, you could hear it, a slow, consistent flow, a quiet reminder of how the city lived. The Harappan drainage system wasn't merely impressive for its time, it was unprecedented. In many modern cities, sewers came only thousands of years later. But here, in this place of clay and calm discipline, careful water management was a foundational principle. Every house had access to water, and every house had a way to release it. It was balance made visible, close by. Wells stand like small, everyday monuments. Cylinder-shaped, built from perfectly aligned bricks, they descend deep into the earth to reach the water table. More than 700 of them are known from Mohenjo-Daro, an astonishing number for a city so ancient. Imagine the daily ritual. A woman lowers a clay pot into the cool well. She listens to the splash as it sinks. She waits as the rope twists and straightens. Then she lifts the vessel, heavy with water, heavy with life. Even the act of drawing water is peaceful. No crowds jostling at a single stream. No scarcity carved into daily routines. Water here is dignity, shared, available, quietly celebrated. The great bath, too, awakens differently when the rains arrive. Tiny rivulets gather near the steps. The air smells clean, clay, moisture. A hint of rivergrass from the Indus. One can imagine how water became more than just sustenance. It became spirit, ritual cleansing, quiet reflection, communal renewal, perhaps before festivals. Entire groups stepped into the pool, letting the water wash not only their skin, but also their thoughts. Or perhaps bathing here was a privilege, reserved for community figures or for ceremonies. We can no longer name. The truth rests somewhere between archaeology and imagination. But in a city where bathing spaces exist in nearly every home, cleanliness was not luxury. It was culture. Walk farther, and you reach higher ground, the Citadel Mound. From here, you might see beyond the city walls to the winding course of the Indus River, calm from a distance, yet capable of dramatic shifts. Over centuries, the river moved, slowly at first. Then, with a decisive sweep that left Mohenjo-Daro farther from its banks, the people responded with adaptation, raising walls, reinforcing embankments, building platforms to protect their homes from floods. The city was not static. It breathed with the river, layer upon layer. The Harappans rebuilt what water tested, turning survival into an architectural tradition. Beneath the visible ruins lie older cities, buried like memories beneath fresh foundations, each one a testament to resilience. Yet water is not only a helper. Sometimes it is a reminder of limits. Floodwaters occasionally swept into the lower town, filling the drains and pooling in the streets. When the river changed course more drastically, the land dried, fields struggled, and wells became harder to rely upon for a civilization that defined itself through water's order. This must have felt like a quiet unraveling, not sudden, not dramatic, just a slow thinning of what once flowed smoothly. Archaeologists trace those final centuries in subtle clues. Bricks lose their perfect ratio. Drainage repairs become fewer. Structures seem rushed, less careful. It's as though the rhythm that guided the city began to fade, as though the whisper of water that once united everyone grew too faint to follow. Still, during its long, thriving age, the Indus and its rain were partners in harmony. Imagine a night in that era. The monsoon storm softens. A cool wind sweeps through the streets. Lanterns flicker inside the modest homes. Families gather in courtyards where rain has washed the dust away. Up on the roof, someone listens to the dripping of water into a jar. Below, the drains carry the runoff back to the earth. The city glistens, refreshed, each brick darker, almost alive. These people lived in the company of water, in its presence and in its promise. Perhaps that is why their legacy feels so gentle. They didn't conquer rivers. They cooperated with them. They didn't seek to dominate nature, only to listen to it. And in that listening, they created something astonishing. A city that lived peacefully in the rhythm of rain today. When storms drift over Mohenjo-Daro, the water still remembers where to go. It traces the old channels, winding through remains that haven't forgotten their purpose. Even after thousands of years, the drains work. Even in silence, the city remembers flow. And if you listen closely, really listen, you might hear it. Water moving against ancient bricks, continuing a conversation begun long before history was written. Yet one thought lingers in the night. What happens to a civilization built on harmony when the rain no longer whispers in familiar ways? Close your eyes and imagine dawn breaking over the Indus plain. The light is soft and amber, falling across long rows of kilns on the edge of the city. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of wet earth. A man kneels by a pit where yesterday's rain has gathered. He scoops the clay with practiced motions, slow, sure, patient. His hands move, as if remembering something older than himself. This is the beginning of everything, of walls, drains, streets, baths, all born from the touch of clay. Before cities were grids, before houses had corners, there were hands like his. The people of the Indus were builders, in the truest sense. Not just architects who drew plans, but makers who understood how to coax strength from the earth itself. Archaeologists can still see their fingerprints pressed into ancient bricks, a mark left unintentionally, yet perfectly preserved by fire and time. Each print belongs to someone anonymous, not a king, not a hero, but a craftsman. These are the hidden architects. They woke with the sun, mixing clay and silt from the Indus River, kneading it with straw or crushed shell to give it firmness. Some worked near the riverbanks, others by the communal kilns outside the city walls. The process was simple, but the patience it required was infinite. First came shaping, pressing clay into molds, trimming the edges. Then came waiting, letting the bricks dry beneath the sky. Too much sun, and they cracked. Too little, and they held moisture that would later break them in the kiln. The makers watched the clouds as closely as the priests watched the stars. When the bricks were ready, they were stacked carefully into kilns, layer by layer, with dried reeds or wood between them. The firing took days. At night, the kilns glowed softly in the darkness, their orange light flickering like distant campfires. By morning, when the ash cooled, the bricks emerged, transformed, hard, red, resilient. Each one looked the same as the next, but each one had passed through countless human hands, through sweat, through time. You might imagine the scene as a kind of ancient choreography, the steady scraping of clay, the soft thud of bricks being stacked, the hiss of fire, the faint hum of conversation carried by the wind. The rhythm of work was not rushed. The people of the Indus seemed to move with the patience of seasons. Their work was steady, deliberate, and deeply synchronized with the pace of nature. In modern terms, they were industrial, but the word feels too cold. What they truly practiced was a craft of harmony, a way of building that mirrored the river's own rhythm. The brickmakers were only one part of the great orchestra. Nearby, potters spun their wheels, shaping the vessels that carried grain, water, and oil. Their wheels hummed with the same steady pace as the kilns burned. You can picture a workshop filled with quiet activity, rows of pots drying on the floor, each one decorated with a simple pattern, zigzags, fish, waves, symbols of movement, life, and continuity. Unlike later civilizations, the Harappans did not seek glory through excess ornament. Their pottery was functional, balanced, but never careless. Even the humblest bowl carried a quiet dignity, and somewhere not far away, metal workers tended small furnaces, melting copper or bronze to cast blades, chisels, or beads. The heat shimmered in the dry air, the fire breathing through clay bellows. They worked in the same posture as the brickmakers, bent forward, focused, surrounded by the scent of earth and smoke. Step farther into the city, and you'll find the carpenters. Their tools rarely preserved, but implied by what remains must have been simple. Chisels, saws, cords for measuring their wood has long vanished, but the impressions it left are still visible in the archaeological record. The sockets where beams once fit, the holes for wooden doors, the outlines of long-decayed roofs. each carpenter, each potter, each brickmaker contributed to the same unseen blueprint, a shared understanding of proportion and order that united the civilization from one settlement to another, whether in Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa or distant Lothal. The same methods, the same ratios, the same care appear again and again. This was not coincidence. It was cooperation across hundreds of miles, without writing, without kings. The Indus people seemed to share not just a technique, but a way of thinking, a belief that good work was its own reward, that harmony mattered more than hierarchy. The builders who raised the walls of Mohenjo-Daro might not have known they were creating one of the most advanced cities on earth. To them, it was simply what one did: build well, keep the drains clear, repair what was worn. Maintenance, not monumentality, defined their days. It's easy to overlook this kind of greatness, the slow, invisible kind. History tends to celebrate what is loud: wars, rulers, conquests. But the Indus story is one of quiet mastery. They left no grand declarations carved in stone. Instead, they left systems that worked, streets that drained, wells that endured, bricks that outlasted empires. Imagine again the rhythm of their day. The heat rises by mid-morning, shimmering over the open squares. Workers wipe sweat from their brows, adjusting their linen wraps. A breeze passes, carrying the faint sound of tools striking stone. Somewhere nearby, someone calls out, not with command, but with coordination. By noon, the sun is fierce. Shadows shrink. The workers rest under makeshift awnings, sharing water, sharing silence. Someone hums softly. The smell of baked earth fills the air. In the distance, the kill smoke twists upward, thin and pale against the bright sky. When evening comes, the workers return home to small, shaded courtyards where wives and children wait. The dust on their skin turns the same color as the bricks they've made. They eat simple meals: lentils, barley bread, milk, perhaps dates or melon. The city they have built surrounds them, protecting them. Their craft shelters their own lives. It is tempting to imagine these builders as nameless laborers, but perhaps they were also the philosophers of their age. People who understood that civilization begins not with kings, but with consistency. They knew that a good brick, well made, could outlast generations. That a drain well built could keep a city alive through flood and rain. That the work of one person, repeated by many, could create balance on a grand scale. Their greatness lay not in invention, but in endurance. Archaeologists have found evidence that the same measuring systems and brick ratios were used across more than 1,000 kilometers. That kind of uniformity hints at communication, not through written law, but through shared tradition. A brickmaker in distant Dolavira could have traded places with one in Mohenjo-Daro and known exactly what to do. The molds would fit. The proportions would match. This was civilization built on trust. Trust that each person would do their part, not perfectly, but consistently. Trust that clay, water, and time would do their quiet work. Trust that order, once established, would sustain itself. As night falls, the workshops quiet. The kilns burn low, glowing softly in the darkness. The river hums in the distance. Somewhere, a child sleeps with a small clay toy in hand, perhaps a cart or an animal. A simple thing, made from leftover clay by a worker's hand, shaped for joy rather than use. It's a reminder that behind every great city, there are moments of small tenderness, things made not from duty, but from love of making itself. The makers of the Indus were not anonymous to one another. They lived in community, sharing skills, meals, and quiet pride. Their lives were repetitive, yes, but filled with purpose. They may not have known that their bricks would one day be studied by people thousands of years later. But perhaps they sensed, even dimly, that good work leaves echoes. When you walk today through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, you can still feel their presence. Every brick wall, every straight street, every aligned drain, all of it is a conversation between hands and earth. The architects who designed the plan are long gone. The rulers, if they ever existed, are forgotten. But the makers remain in every line of the city. They are the ones who gave the Indus its quiet rhythm, a rhythm that still hums beneath the dust. And as the stars rise over the ancient plain, you might find yourself wondering, when perfection is built by many unseen hands, who truly owns the masterpiece? If you could walk into a Harappan workshop 3,000 years ago, you would not see chaos. You would see calm order, bricks in neat stacks, tools arranged in rows, pottery laid to dry in measured patterns. Nothing hurried, nothing improvised. To the untrained eye, this might seem ordinary, but to those who study ruins, this quiet discipline is astonishing, because behind every straight street and aligned drain lies one of humanity's first experiments with standardization, a civilization that measured everything but left behind no words to explain how. The Indus people did not boast about their precision. They left no inscriptions describing the mathematics of their cities, no manuals on architecture. Yet, from the evidence buried in the dust, we can see their logic as clearly as if it had been written in stone. Each brick, for example, followed the same ratio: 1 part height, 2 parts width, 4 parts length. It's a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, repeating across time and place. Whether a brick was made in Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro, its proportions matched exactly. That meant walls could be built seamlessly, repairs could be made without adjustment, and new settlements could rise following the same invisible grid. This quiet uniformity across hundreds of miles was no accident. It was policy without proclamation. And then there were the weights. Small cubes made of chert stone, polished to a dull sheen. They fit easily in the palm of your hand. Some are so tiny they could balance on your fingertip. Others are heavier, perfect for weighing grain or metal. Archaeologists have found them in nearly every Harappan city, always following the same incremental system, doubling and having in perfect progression. It is one of the earliest known examples of a binary scale. Long before the idea of standardized measurement was formalized elsewhere, these weights allowed trade to function with quiet honesty. A merchant in Dalavira could weigh carnelian beads or copper ingots using the same units as a trader in Mohenjo-Daro. Even without shared language, trust could exist, because numbers, once measured, need no translation. But the most haunting mystery lies in how they achieved this. There are no surviving inscriptions telling us who designed the system, no symbols declaring authority or divine inspiration. It simply exists, as though it emerged, collectively, agreed upon, not by decree, but by habit. A civilization that trusted practice over proclamation. It's easy to miss how radical that is. Most societies of the time in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, defined order through power. Kings and priests declared laws. Measurements were enforced from above. But the Indus seems to have worked differently. Its order flowed from the ground up, from shared understanding, not forced obedience. Perhaps this is why the ruins feel so peaceful. There are no temples towering over homes, no palaces dominating the city grid, just streets, baths, wells, drains, and the subtle hum of equality. Now imagine the tools that guided this perfection. Few survive, but fragments speak. Archaeologists have found bronze chisels, copper saws, shell inlays, marked with faint notches, signs of measurement. One remarkable discovery was a scale carved from ivory, found at Lafau. Its smallest division is less than 2 millimeters, astonishingly precise for its time. It tells us something profound about the people who made it. They valued accuracy for its own sake. Even in the absence of empire, their craft pursued exactness. And what of their geometry? You can see it in the city's plan. Streets running north-south, east-west, perfectly aligned to the cardinal directions. This suggests astronomical awareness, not superstition, but calculation. Each city, from Harappa to Kalibangan, follows this invisible compass. It's as if the builders believed that to live well, one must first live in alignment with earth, with water, with the stars. The quiet brilliance of their system becomes clear when you consider its endurance. The same ratios, bricks, and measures persisted for centuries, unchanged, unquestioned, reliable. Even when cities rose and fell, when floods came and rivers shifted, the system remained. It was the civilization's heartbeat. Think about that for a moment. A world without kings, yet ruled by consistency. A world without armies, yet united by agreement. A world without written law, yet governed by shared practice. Perhaps that is why the Indus still fascinates. It challenges what we think civilization requires. Let's walk for a moment through the city again. You are standing in a long street paved with baked brick. To your left, narrow lanes lead into clusters of homes, each one built around a small courtyard. You notice something strange. The doors don't face the main street. Instead, they open inward, toward privacy and shade. It's a quiet detail, but it speaks volumes. Order wasn't just in the city's structure, it was in its values. In the Indus, modesty and function mattered more than display. And yet, even here, the same measurements rule. The houses vary in size, but their proportions remain familiar. Bricks, thresholds, and wells, all obeying the same invisible geometry. In this world, perfection isn't loud, it's repetitive. And repetition, done with care, becomes a kind of devotion. We can even see traces of their tools in the artifacts left behind. Take the steatite seals, for instance, small carved squares bearing images of animals, bulls, elephants, unicorns, tigers. The carvings are so fine they could only have been made with sharp instruments and steady hands. Each seal is almost identical in size, yet unique in detail. They were likely used for trade, pressed into clay to mark ownership or origin. Even here, standardization persists, each seal a personal mark within a shared system. Their artistry wasn't chaotic or improvised. It was methodical. Every line, every animal carved with deliberate care. When archaeologists first uncovered these patterns, they struggled to understand how such order could emerge without central authority. Some argued there must have been rulers whose presence has simply vanished. Others suggested a priestly class, quiet, unseen, but powerful. And yet, despite decades of searching, no palaces, no thrones, no monuments have been found. Instead, we find balance across every settlement, every artifact. It's as if the civilization itself was the architect, its people the collective designers. Each person measured, weighed, and built according to rules everyone understood, but no one needed to enforce. Perhaps that is the true marvel of the Indus. They mastered the invisible. Their tools and weights were not just for trade or construction. They were symbols of trust, of balance, of shared rhythm. A cube of chert, a line on ivory, a brick's proportion. These were the threads that held their world together. At dusk, the city would soften. Shadows would stretch across the measured streets. Merchants would pack their goods, carefully weighing each piece before sealing it in a jar. Potters would stack their wares, counting, noting, balancing. And somewhere near the kilns, a craftsman might pause, wipe the dust from his hands, and line up his tools, each one returning to its place exactly where it belongs. It's in that moment, quiet, ordinary, almost invisible, that you can feel the civilization breathe. No shouts, just alignment, human and cosmic, precise and peaceful. To measure something is to make it real. To weigh it, to balance it, is to give it meaning. The Harappans measured not just their materials, but their world. They found harmony in the smallest things, in the width of a brick, the mark of a chisel, the span of a street. And through those small acts of precision, they created one of the most enduring patterns of order humanity has ever known. As the night deepens and the city fades back into silence, you might find yourself wondering, when a civilization builds perfection through patience alone, is it the measure that defines the people, or the people who define the measure? You have seen their walls, their drains, their perfect bricks. You have traced their measurements, their weights, their lines of logic. But none of these things truly define the Indus civilization. What does is something quieter, something invisible. It is the pattern of human life that repeated itself, day after day, generation after generation, until it became a blueprint more enduring than any text or monument. This was the human blueprint. A civilization designed not around kings or gods, but around the simple genius of cooperation. Picture a morning in Mohenjo-Daro, not during its glory, but in the middle of an ordinary year. The river runs high from the monsoon rains. The air smells faintly of wet dust and baked earth. Children are carrying small pots of water from the well to their homes. A woman is sweeping her courtyard. A man bends over the edge of a drain, clearing it with a stick. Nothing remarkable. And yet this quiet scene is the heart of the Indus world. For the civilization's greatness did not lie in its rulers or armies, but in how ordinary people lived together, how they maintained what they had built. Their order was not imposed from above. It was lived from below. The cities of the Indus were designed for such lives, intimate, interconnected, practical. Houses were built close, yet private. Every home had a well or access to one nearby, and most had small bathing areas, not for luxury, but for cleanliness, routine, and ritual. The drains that ran through the city were masterpieces of engineering covered with stone slabs, sloping perfectly to carry waste away. But what kept them working was not the design alone. It was the discipline of the people who cleaned them. Each person did their part. No monument could have survived without that quiet diligence. It's easy to forget that civilization depends on maintenance more than invention. The Indus people seemed to understand this intuitively. Their streets were swept, their wells repaired, their bricks reused when old walls fell. Even decay was managed carefully, folded back into the order of things. And perhaps that is why, when archaeologists uncover these ruins, they find so little chaos, no layers of ash from war, no signs of violent overthrow, only the slow erosion of time, the kind that happens when a civilization fades not from conflict, but from change. Who, then, were these people? We can only guess from what they left behind, from the echoes of their work. There were farmers who coaxed crops from the floodplains, wheat, barley, sesame. There were traders who guided bullock carts loaded with goods to docks and markets. There were bead makers, goldsmiths, carpenters, and bakers. Each occupation, though humble, fit into the same rhythm, a rhythm of balance. Even in their art, this harmony appears. Their seals and pottery rarely show scenes of violence or hierarchy. Instead, they depict animals, bulls, elephants, fish, symbols of life, movement, and calm endurance. It's as if they saw beauty not in conquest, but in continuity. You might wonder how they governed such order without kings. There were no palaces, no royal tombs, no inscriptions proclaiming victory. Perhaps their governance was communal, based on councils, neighborhoods, or guilds. Perhaps decisions flowed like water, distributed evenly through the channels of daily life. Or perhaps their order was something subtler, a shared belief that stability itself was sacred, that the measure of a person was not how much they ruled, but how well they maintained what was already in balance. At the core of this system was cooperation. Trade required it. Agriculture demanded it. Urban life depended on it. The great drains could only function if everyone respected them. The weights and measures could only hold meaning if everyone agreed to use them honestly. And they did. For centuries. This is what makes the Indus civilization almost haunting. It worked. It was complex, advanced, and far-reaching. Yet it did not collapse under the weight of ambition or tyranny. It endured quietly, like a well-built wall standing against the rain. Of course, even quiet worlds change. The rivers shifted. The mighty Indus itself may have altered course. Fields that once flourished turned dry. Trade routes weakened, and slowly the rhythm faltered. People began to leave. Some moved eastward toward the Ganges plain. Others stayed until the water ran too low or the soil too tired. There was no grand fall, no apocalyptic end, only dispersal. A civilization folding itself into new lands, its memory carried not by monuments, but by methods. Even long after the cities were abandoned, the descendants of the Indus people continued to make bricks in the same proportions. They kept measuring grain with familiar weights. They kept building wells, straight streets, and courtyards. The same blueprint lived quietly through time. The civilization did not die. It diffused. Imagine one of those last families leaving Mohenjo-Daro. They walk along a dusty road under a low sun, oxen pulling a cart of tools and pots. Behind them, the city glows faintly in the distance, its streets empty but still perfect. They do not think of themselves as the end of anything. They are simply moving, as humans always have, following water, following life. Perhaps one of them looks back and wonders if others will someday return. If, in some far age, the city might awaken again beneath the dust. And perhaps, without knowing it, they whisper a kind of blessing, not for glory, but for memory. Today, when you look at the ruins of the Indus cities, you don't see kings or heroes. You see the work of countless ordinary lives layered one atop another. A civilization made not from conquest, but from collaboration. Not from faith in one leader, but from trust in one another. Their legacy isn't in legend, it's in logic. In the way the bricks still fit together. In the way the streets still align. In the way their pattern still makes sense, even after 4,000 years. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them. Not their voices, but their rhythm. The steady thud of clay against mold. The scrape of a chisel. The trickle of water through a well. The soft sweep of a broom across a clean courtyard. Each sound, once unremarkable, now echoes across time. A civilization that whispered instead of shouting. And yet, somehow, its whisper still carries. So as we close this story, and the makers of the Indus fade once more into the dust, let this thought linger. Perhaps greatness was never meant to be loud. Perhaps civilization endures longest when it forgets to seek glory. The people of the Indus built a world that worked, not because they sought to be remembered, but because they sought to live well together. That, in itself, may be the most extraordinary achievement of all. And so, as the night falls over the plains once more, the last fires of their kilns dimming in memory, one question remains, soft, almost inaudible, carried by the wind. When a city is built by hands that never sought praise, does history still remember the builders, or do the walls remember for them? You are standing on the edge of an ancient riverbank. The water glides by without hurry, wide, brown, and quiet. The air smells faintly of clay, salt, and sunlight. Once, this river carried not just fish or reeds, but the lifeblood of a civilization. Boats once moved here, slow wooden crafts with curved prows, their hulls sealed with bitumen to keep out the leaks, their sails catching the monsoon breeze. They carried not passengers, but cargo, jars of grain, bundles of cloth, bright stones from distant quarries, beads of carnelian glowing red in the sunlight. No one wrote down their journeys. No one carved their names. And yet, their trade connected worlds. When we speak of the Harappans, we often picture their cities, the wells, the drains, the careful bricks. But beneath that, still surface, flowed a great network, a web of rivers and routes that carried goods, stories, and silent trust from one shore to another. Archaeologists call it trade, but to the people who lived it, it must have felt more like breathing, a rhythm so natural, so constant, that it needed no ceremony. From the highlands of Baluchistan came copper and stone. From Gujarat's coast came shells and pearls. From the forests to the east came timber and resin. And from far beyond the sea, from the cities of Mesopotamia, came whispers of exchange, silver, lapis lazuli, and ideas. Picture a morning at Lothal. one of the Harappan port towns near the Arabian Sea. The air is damp, the tide low. Fishermen stand knee-deep in the water, mending nets. Behind them, on the dry dock, a structure older than most nations, merchants move among stacks of goods. The dock itself is an engineering marvel, a rectangular basin carved with stone blocks, with channels to let water flow in and out with the tide. Here, boats were loaded and unloaded with care. Every jar, every seal, every mark meant something. A trader checks his cargo, baskets of barley sealed with a lump of clay, bundles of cloth marked with the emblem of a bull, strings of beads carefully counted and recorded not in words, but in symbols pressed into clay. When he finishes, he presses his seal into the soft clay, a square piece of steatite, carved with an image of a unicorn and a line of symbols that no one today can read. That impression, small and quiet, was his guarantee, his signature. These seals were the passports of the Indus world. They traveled farther than their makers ever did, to cities like Ur, Susa, and Kish in Mesopotamia, where merchants from far lands met along the docks of the Persian Gulf. In those distant places, archaeologists have found Indus seals, the same tiny squares, bearing the same elegant animals. Their script as mysterious there as it is here, and alongside them, in Harappan cities, Mesopotamian goods have been found: silver ornaments, beads of lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, even Sumerian cylinder seals, carved in a different style but serving the same purpose. This was not conquest. It was connection, a flow of trust across thousands of miles of water and desert. Imagine the journey of one of those boats. It leaves the dock at Lothal, pushed by oarsmen whose rhythm matches the slow lap of the water. The air is thick with the smell of salt and wood. The boat's hull creaks softly. It follows the coast of what is now Gujarat, slipping through estuaries and tidal creeks, stopping at small settlements where fresh water and supplies are gathered. Then, when the wind is right, it sails west, out into the open sea, following the stars and the memory of the tides. The sailors have no compass, no map, but they know the sea's moods, when it will rise, when it will rest. The monsoon winds are their calendar. Weeks later, they reach the shores of Dilmun, the ancient island of Bahrain, a midpoint between Indus and Mesopotamia. Here, merchants meet under the palm trees, exchanging goods in a mixture of gestures and smiles. No common tongue, yet perfect understanding, sealed by trade, not by treaty. From Dilmun, the cargo travels onward, perhaps to the ports of Ur or Lagash, where Sumerian scribes record the arrival of Meluha boats, the ancient name for the Indus region. In those records, scratched into clay thousands of years ago, the Harappans appear like shadows. Boats from Meluha have brought wood, copper, and ivory. A man of Meluha speaks through a translator. These faint lines are the only written traces of their voices, recorded not by them, but by those they traded with. Yet even these small mentions tell us much. They tell us that Harappan merchants stood in foreign ports, negotiating calmly, their seals pressed into foreign clay. They tell us that these people, whose language is lost, were trusted. They tell us that their order, their quiet precision, reached beyond their rivers to touch another world. Trade in the Indus was not merely about wealth. It was about connection. Every object carried through their roots, tells a story of balance. A bead, carved and drilled so perfectly, it could only have been made by a steady hand and a sharp tool. A pottery jar, thin as an eggshell, its curves identical to those made hundreds of miles away. A piece of copper, smelted in the mountains, hammered into form, then traded for lapis from Afghanistan or shells from the Arabian Sea. Each item was part of a silent conversation between lands, a dialogue without words, sustained by shared trust. Back home in Harappan, the traders' families awaited their return. The children might gather near the docks, eyes bright, watching for sails on the horizon. Women prepared offerings for safe passage, not grand rituals, but small gestures, a lamp lit at dusk, a whisper toward the water. When the boats finally appeared, the city stirred quietly, efficiently. Men unloaded goods, noted seals, stacked jars. There was no shouting, no chaos. Trade, like everything else in the Indus, was done with calm order. The ports, the markets, the storage rooms, all designed for smooth flow, for movement that mirrored the river itself. Even their cities seemed to echo this philosophy of circulation. Wide streets for people, narrow lanes for drainage, wells on every corner, all suggesting an understanding of flow and balance. Trade was not an intrusion upon daily life. It was its extension. The same care that went into aligning a brick went into balancing an account. Precision was a form of faith, a way of keeping the world in harmony. And yet, for all its reach, the Harappan trade left no monuments, no triumphal docks, no carvings of sailors or kings, just the faint remains of warehouses, the impressions of seals, the layout of quiet ports like Lodatoth. It is as though they wanted the system, not the self, to endure, the root, not the ruler, the balance, not the boast. Their legacy is one of quiet continuity, a civilization that flowed rather than ruled. Tonight, as the waves of time wash over their forgotten harbors, one might wonder what keeps a world alive longer, the wealth it gathers or the trust it leaves behind. Some civilizations left behind empires carved in stone. The Harappans left behind seals, small, silent squares of steatite that fit easily into the palm of a hand. Each one was a world in miniature, an animal, a line of strange symbols, a mark pressed into soft clay to say, "This is mine, this is known, this is trusted." No gold inscription, no royal boast, just order and identity, impressed softly and left to dry in the sun. Imagine sitting beside a Harappan craftsman at work. His tools are simple, a small bronze blade, a piece of soft stone, a tray of fine sand. He leans close, his breath calm, his hand steady. Every movement has weight and patience. He carves not with haste, but with certainty, etching the outline of a unicorn, its horn long and elegant. Below it, he adds a line of marks, a script that no one today can yet read. Perhaps it's a name, perhaps a title, a number, a prayer, or a contract. Whatever it was, it mattered deeply enough to be carved into permanence. When the work is done, the seal is fired gently, hardening into smooth white stone. It gleams faintly in the light, a quiet testament to precision. Thousands of these seals have been found in Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Lothal, Mohenjo-Daro, and beyond. They vary in design, but they all share the same symmetry, square form, balanced lines, animal above, symbols below. Like a heartbeat, steady across centuries, their makers could have chosen chaos, random images, shifting patterns, but they didn't. They chose discipline. It's as if the people of the Indus spoke a language of structure itself, one that valued clarity, trust, and repetition more than display. The animals carved on these seals are no mere decoration. Each has a presence, a stillness that feels deliberate. There is the unicorn, the most common, not a mythic beast, but a stylized form, perhaps representing power under restraint. There is the humped bull, massive and calm, the embodiment of strength contained. There are elephants, rhinoceroses, tigers, and goats, all carved with attention to detail, their muscles and horns rendered with affection. No animal is shown in motion. All are poised, tranquil, alert, as if caught in eternal composure, mirrors of the civilization that made them. The seals were used in trade. Ease pressed into lumps of clay that sealed jars, baskets, or storage rooms. When the clay hardened, it became a lock of trust. Anyone who broke that seal broke a promise. Anyone who carried it carried a reputation. In that small impression lay an entire system of honesty, a quiet understanding that commerce could flow only when trust was unbroken. But the seals were not only for merchants. Some were found in homes, others in what may have been administrative centers or temples. Some were worn as pendants, personal marks of belonging. They might have served as identification, property markers, or spiritual symbols, tiny declarations of order amid the vast hum of daily life. And then there is the script, perfect lines of symbols that march across the top of each seal. They look so simple, neat, geometric, balanced. Each sign seems placed with purpose, as though the writer feared imbalance more than error. But no one today can read them, despite decades of study. The Harappan script remains unbroken, a quiet code that holds its meaning behind a curtain of time. It consists of about 400 unique signs, too few for a full language like Sumerian, too many for a pure alphabet. Perhaps it was a protoscript, a system of memory aids, not full sentences. Or perhaps it was a complete written language, one whose grammar we can no longer hear. Scholars have tried to read it using Dravidian roots, or Proto-Sanskrit, or even Mesopotamian loanwords. But the truth is, we don't yet know. The script keeps its silence, its words like ripples frozen in ancient clay. And maybe that's fitting, because the Harappans themselves seem to have preferred quiet precision over loud proclamation. They built vast cities without kings. They maintained order without war. They traded across continents without carving their triumphs in stone. Why would their words be any different? Perhaps their script was meant to be understood within a circle, a shared code among merchants and officials, not a language of poets or conquerors. Perhaps, like their drainage systems, it was designed to be functional, a tool for smooth flow, not a monument to ego in that sense. Their writing was less about speech and more about structure. Each symbol an act of alignment, each seal an affirmation that order can exist without noise. Some seals were found broken, perhaps deliberately snapped when their owners died, or when agreements ended. Even in destruction, the Harappans seemed to follow ritual, as if acknowledging that trust, like life, must close its own circle. Others were found far from home, in Mesopotamian ruins, in Persian Gulf islands, resting among foreign artifacts like distant echoes of familiar rhythm, their marks still clear, their meanings still gone, and yet they speak in another way, not through translation, but through form. They tell us that people once cared enough about precision to carve meaning into stone no larger than a coin. They tell us that trade was not chaos, but choreography. They tell us that civilization, at its heart, is a pattern of trust repeated until it becomes invisible. Under the museum lights today, a seal looks simple, a small white square behind glass. But if you look closely, you can almost see the craftsman's fingers pressing it into the clay. Feel the soft give of the surface. Hear the faint exhale of completion, a sound no louder than a sigh, a moment of still perfection frozen across 4,000 years, and somewhere, perhaps beneath another layer of dust, there are still thousands waiting, each one holding a story that no one alive can yet read when they are found. They will not shout their secrets. They will whisper them softly, patiently, as they always have. The journey of trade is rarely loud when it ends. It fades like the tide, not with a crash, but with a long and distant sigh. So it was with the Indus. Once boats glided down its wide channels, their hulls heavy with cargo, carnelian beads, ivory combs, copper tools, jars of oil and grain. Sails bloomed under the monsoon winds. The oars moved rhythmically, in silence except for the splash of water against wood, from Harappa in the north to Lothal in the south. The river was a living road, a quiet, slow-moving thread, and ports to distant worlds. But one day, that steady rhythm began to falter. At first, it was subtle, a delay in the rains, a change in the river's course, a whisper of silt where once there had been deep water. Farmers noticed before anyone else. They looked at the sky and saw clouds that came late, rains that ended too soon. The soil cracked earlier each season. The riverbed, once generous, began to shrink in width and depth. Trade, like life itself, depends on predictability, on the idea that tomorrow will be roughly like today. But the Indus, that patient river, began to shift its mood. At the port of Lothal, the tide no longer reached the docks as it once had. Silt crept inward, thick and stubborn, choking the inlet. Boats that had once floated easily now grounded in the mud. The great basin, once an artificial harbor, filled slowly with sediment until only memories of water remained. And yet, for years, the people tried to hold on. They dredged. They built. They adapted. They watched the tides with growing unease, timing departures with the moon. They knew, though they could not yet name it, that the river's rhythm was breaking. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, across the western deserts, traders noticed something to dot the goods from the land they called Maluha. The land of fine carnelian, lapis, and ivory became rarer. The seals bearing strange animals and unreadable signs stopped arriving. The Maluhan neighborhoods in Mesopotamian port towns began to thin out. It was as if the Indus had gone silent, not through disaster, but through distance. The trade that once flowed like water was now evaporating quietly into air. Archaeologists today piece together the fading network through fragments, a shard here, a bead there, a forgotten dock beneath the soil. They find less evidence of long-distance trade in the later layers of Harappan cities. Warehouses once filled with goods now stand empty, their bricks repurposed for simpler homes. Even the famous seals begin to disappear. Few are found in the final phases of occupation. Perhaps the merchants no longer needed them, or perhaps there were simply fewer promises left to seal. Still, the decline of trade didn't come with chaos. No burned layers, no mass graves, no sudden abandonment. The Harappans did not fall in fire, they faded in grace. When the river changed, they moved with it. Villages appeared farther east, toward the plains of the Ganges, smaller, humbler, but still marked by the same steady hand. The order didn't die, it diffused. Their urban rhythm slowed into a rural one, but the habits of balance, the measured bricks, the wells, the sense of proportion continued quietly for generations. Standing today among the ruins of Harappa, you can still trace the faint memory of that trade. The old warehouses, with their raised platforms and narrow alleys, once echoed with footsteps, wheels, and soft voices. Now they lie open to the wind, their stones bleached and still. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the creak of a wooden cart, the slosh of water from the docks, the call of a trader greeting another with a nod. No words needed, just recognition. Trade was never about noise, it was about rhythm. And when that rhythm faltered, the silence that followed felt vast. Scholars speak of climate change, of tectonic shifts, of the drying of the Ghaggar-Hakra River, the possible Saraswati of legend. They build models, map courses, and measure sediments. But beyond the data lies something simpler, more human. The Harappans lived in harmony with nature for so long that when the environment changed, they did not fight it. And in listening, they chose to let go. It wasn't surrender. It was acceptance, the kind of wisdom that whispers, "We have lived well here. Now it is time to move." When the trade stopped, the world did not lose the Harappans entirely. Their patterns, their bricks, their weights, their wells flowed quietly into later cultures, long after their ports dried. Villages still used the same measurements for building, still aligned streets by the same stars, still shaped pottery in the same curves. The Indus may have gone silent, but its rhythm survived in the hands of those who came after. In museums, we sometimes look at Harappan artifacts as though they belong to a vanished people, but perhaps it's better to see them as the ancestors of patience, teachers of stillness in the face of change. Their story is not tragedy, it is transformation told softly. A civilization that did not collapse, it simply exhaled, leaving behind the faint trace of balance, like ripples spreading outward long after the stone has sunk. And perhaps that's how great civilizations end, not with noise or fire, but with quiet adaptation, a return to the earth that made them. The rivers keep shifting, the rains keep whispering, and somewhere beneath the soil, the old trade routes still hum faintly, their silence not emptiness, but rest. So if you ever stand at the ruins of Lothal or Harappa after rain, listen carefully. The earth still smells faintly of salt. You may feel a breeze that once carried voices across seas. You may even sense the echo of boats gliding through mist, their cargo bound not for conquest, but for connection. And then you will understand. The trade that flowed like water did not end. It only changed its form. becoming history itself, flowing through time instead of tide. You can almost hear the stillness of a dying civilization if you listen closely enough. It is not a collapse marked by screams or smoke, not a moment frozen in violence. Instead, it is a long sigh that drifts through the centuries, the slow fading of rhythm in a land that once hummed with purpose. This is how the Harappan world began to disappear, not with war, but with whispers of earth, water, and time. By the late centuries of the Indus civilization, around 1900 BCE, give or take, the land itself began to change. The great cities of Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, and Dholavira had already seen their peak. They stood proud, precise, and organized. But the environment that had nurtured them for centuries was beginning to betray them in small, almost invisible ways. The monsoon rains that once arrived predictably began to falter. The mighty rivers, the lifelines of the Indus Valley, began to shift their courses, subtly at first, then with increasing insistence. It's difficult for modern eyes to imagine what that must have looked like. The Harappans didn't have the luxury of seeing the change mapped out from above. To them, it might have felt like a season gone strange, a riverbank that stayed dry too long, or a well that didn't refill after the rains. Maybe the crops didn't rise as tall, or the air carried a little more dust than before. These are the slow warnings of nature, not catastrophic enough to panic, but persistent enough to erode certainty. Archaeologists studying layers of silt and pollen can now trace these subtle shifts. The once fertile plains began to dry. The Gagar-Hakra river system, which many believe may have been the ancient Sarasvati, started to lose its flow. Towns that had once thrived along its banks began to fade into quiet desolation. The Harappans, practical as ever, did not fight the earth. They began moving. Settlements grew smaller, more scattered, closer to the remaining sources of water. And yet there is something deeply human about how long they held on. Even as bricks cracked and drains filled with silt, someone kept sweeping a street. Someone kept firing a kill. Someone kept measuring grain, even as trade dwindled and granaries grew emptier. Life, it seems, doesn't stop suddenly. It lingers, stubbornly repeating routines that once gave meaning. The climate change that touched the Indus Valley was part of a larger global pattern, a shift that affected Egypt, Mesopotamia, and other Bronze Age civilizations around the same time. But the Harappans, true to their quiet nature, did not respond with conquest or empire. They did not fortify or fight. They adapted, adjusted, and slowly faded, like a melody played more softly until only the memory of it remains. Still, the ruins speak. Beneath layers of dust, archaeologists find stories of resilience. Wells continued to be built long after the cities began to decline. Pottery styles remained consistent, humble, functional, beautiful. These were not signs of panic, but of endurance. It's as if the Harappans believed that balance would return, that the river would find its way home again. But rivers have their own will. As the Indus changed its course and tributaries dried, the trade that once connected distant lands began to falter. Without fresh goods or travelers, the marketplaces grew silent. Workshops slowed. The seals, once stamped with care to mark trust and trade, gathered dust. The docks and riverbanks that once echoed with the splash of boats became still pools of silence. And yet, Even as nature's quiet rebellion unfolded, there was no single day of collapse. No burning walls, no buried treasure of desperate kings. Only absence, spreading like mist. Perhaps some of the last Harappans remembered the old rhythm of rain, how it once arrived in time with planting, how it drummed softly on the roofs of fired brick. Perhaps they told stories to their children about the great cities that once gleamed with order, about streets that ran straight and drains that never overflowed. But with each generation, those stories would fade, like the inscriptions on their undeciphered seals. The meaning would remain just out of reach, familiar yet lost. And so, the Harappan world dimmed, not extinguished by destruction, but lulled to sleep by time itself. What had taken centuries to build dissolved slowly into earth and silence. Yet one cannot help but wonder, did they know? Did someone, standing by a drying river at dusk, sense that an age was ending? You can imagine it, the sound of footsteps echoing faintly in a city built for thousands, now half empty. The walls still stood straight, the streets still ran in perfect lines, but the life between them had thinned to a quiet hum. Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Kalibangan, Lothal, all once alive with the daily rhythm of clay, trade, and water, had begun to drift toward silence. The drains, once a marvel of precision, no longer carried the rush of waste and runoff that had defined the city's clever design. When you walk through the ruins today, those same channels lie open to the sun, dry and still. In their time, they were symbols of order, every drop guided, every puddle managed, every flow controlled. The Harappans built their cities as if chaos could be kept at bay with clean water and baked clay. But in the end, even the best-built systems falter when people begin to leave. Archaeologists have found layers of silt in the drains of Mohenjo-Daro, a quiet sign that maintenance had stopped. Once, there were workers who knew each bend of the pipes, who cleared blockages and swept streets after the rain. Their absence left the city vulnerable. The dust began to settle where it was once washed away, filling corners and covering thresholds. Even the great bath, that symbol of purification and ritual order, began to crumble around its edges. Its bricks loosened, the bitumen seal cracked, and water no longer gathered where it once shimmered under the sun. But why did people leave such perfect places? Why abandon comfort, stability, and the rhythm of order? Perhaps the answer lies not in a single reason, but in a slow unraveling of many. The rivers had shifted, yes, but so had trade. The long routes that once linked the Indus cities to distant Mesopotamia and the Arabian coast had grown unreliable. Without trade, storage houses emptied, and the steady hum of exchange faltered. Boats that once carried cargoes of beads, grain, and cotton began to rest on dry riverbeds. Markets grew quieter. Workshops closed their doors. And yet, the Harappans did not vanish overnight. Instead, they adapted in smaller, quieter ways. The grand cities began to empty, but new. Smaller settlements appeared elsewhere, near newer streams, in the shadow of hills, on higher, safer ground. These were the same people, carrying with them the same habits and crafts, but on a smaller scale. Civilization, after all, doesn't die, it diffuses. Still, one can't help picturing the moment when a street in Mohenjo-Daro first stood empty. The sound of clay pots clinking was gone. The chatter of traders, the laughter of children running across the courtyard. the steady beat of the potter's wheel, all fading into absence. The air, once filled with the scent of wet earth and fire, would have grown still and heavy. Even the bricks themselves tell the story. Many walls show signs of reuse, bricks pulled from older structures to build smaller homes or boundary walls. It was as if the city was cannibalizing itself, piece by piece, adjusting to its shrinking pulse. Some wells were deepened, others abandoned. A few rooms were repurposed, perhaps turned into workshops or storage, as people consolidated what little remained. Life was still there, but quieter, more practical, stripped of grandeur. And then there are the skeletons. Not many, but a few, found lying awkwardly in streets and alleys, unburied, unceremonious. There is no evidence of massacre or war, no signs of weapons or organized violence. These seem to be people caught in transition, perhaps too sick or too tired to leave when others already had. Their bones rest under layers of dust, as if the city itself folded over them, protecting its last inhabitants from time. There are other clues to small artifacts that whisper of changing habits. Coarser pottery, less standardized weights, local variations in tools. The old precision of the Harappan world, that obsession with measurement, with right angles and perfect ratios, began to blur. It's as though their collective patience, once infinite, had run out. And yet, even in decay, there is grace. The Harappans didn't crumble into chaos. They faded with dignity. They did not burn their cities or destroy their gods. They simply moved away, letting the earth reclaim what they had borrowed from it. The cities were left standing, proud, silent, and waiting for time to cover them gently. When archaeologists rediscovered Mohenjo-Daro in the 1920s, the city was still almost eerily intact. The streets, the drains, the wells, all waiting, as though the people had stepped out for a moment and never returned. You can still trace their footsteps in the patterns of the bricks. Every line and corner hums with a memory of human intention, the belief that order could be permanent. But order is fragile. It depends on people showing up to clean, to trade, to build, to care. When they stopped, the drains stopped singing. Even now, when the rain falls over those ancient bricks, water still runs through the old paths. It seeps through the cracks and follows the same courses designed thousands of years ago. It's as if the city remembers, even when we do not. And perhaps that is the most haunting part of all, that the world keeps the shape of human hands, long after those hands have turned to dust. If you were to stand today amid the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro at dusk, when the air turns heavy with the scent of river dust, you might feel something more than absence. You might feel memory, not the kind that tells stories, but the kind that lingers in stone. The city is quiet now, yet the silence hums with the weight of what once was. The streets remain straight. The wells are still deep. The bricks are aligned with such care that even time has hesitated to undo them. But everything that gave these structures their purpose, the people, the rituals, the rhythm of daily life, is gone. The Harappan world, once so alive, dissolved not into chaos but into calm, leaving behind the faintest echo of a civilization that preferred order over glory. For centuries, the land forgot them. When the first travelers and farmers stumbled across the mounds of baked earth along the Indus, they did not know they were walking atop one of humanity's first great urban dreams. They took the bricks, reused them, built with them, not realizing that these same bricks had once been part of baths, granaries, and homes that followed a code older than empires. The Harappans had slipped so gently into the folds of time that even memory had failed to keep hold. It was only in the 1920s that the silence began to stir again. Archaeologists, digging in the plains of Sindh and Punjab, unearthed the bones of a forgotten order. Bit by bit, they revealed a world so advanced and so peaceful that it unsettled old assumptions about what civilization meant. Here was no kingdom, no throne, no evidence of grand rulers or bloody conquests, only balance, routine, and remarkable cleanliness. A civilization that had built its greatness on the quiet precision of everyday life. The rediscovery of the Indus Valley civilization, Harappan, Mohenjo-Daro, Lothal, Dolavira, and others, redefined history itself. It showed that humanity's earliest greatness did not always roar with war drums or rise under empires. Sometimes, it whispered, as archaeologists brushed the dust from fired bricks and delicate pottery. They also brushed against mystery. The Harappan script, carved on seals and tablets, still refuses to speak. Its symbols, elegant and compact, remain unreadable. The language of this world is locked away, like a voice muffled behind the sands of time. It is one of history's great ironies, a civilization so organized, so meticulous, yet forever silent in its own words. Perhaps, in a way, that silence is fitting. It mirrors the way they lived, measured, calm, deliberate. They built cities not for conquest, but for comfort. They managed water, not armies. They believed in drainage systems, in proportion, in shared order, the kinds of achievements that leave no epic poem, but define the substance of survival. Even the decline of their world feels like an act of balance. There was no burning, no final war, no fall from grace. Only a gradual retreat from great cities to smaller towns, from river plains to new lands. Over time, those who carried the last echoes of Harappan life became absorbed into later cultures, Vedic, Gangetic, Indian. The rhythm continued, just in a different form. The thread of civilization, though thinned, was never truly broken. And so, what remains today is not a story of loss, but of endurance. Every brick, every drain, every fragment of pottery stands as a quiet rebellion against oblivion. The Harappans may have vanished from view, but their ideas of order, sanitation, community, and quiet dignity flowed onward, shaping the unseen roots of later civilizations. Stand there long enough, and the silence begins to speak. The wind moves through the streets like a faint memory of footsteps. The shadow of the great bath stretches across the ground as if it remembers the shimmer of water. In the wells, you can still see the reflection of the sky, just as they once did, perhaps wondering, as you might now, where the rain had gone. Their cities did not fall, they exhaled. Their people did not vanish. They became the dust that fed new worlds. And maybe that is the final truth of the Harappans. That greatness does not need to shout to be heard. Sometimes it lingers in the geometry of old streets, in the patient symmetry of walls that still stand against the wind, in the logic of drains that once sang beneath the rain. The Indus cities whisper still if you listen closely enough. And if you do, you might hear not an ending, but the steady breathing of history asleep beneath the dust.